At this time, I will introduce, we've had a change from our original schedule due to illness, I believe. But so we have people that have been willing to step up for us, and we thank them very much for doing that. But we have Brianna Metz and Ryan Olson from the United States Soybean Export Council, and they will both discuss case studies focused on aligning U.S. production with international preferences, which includes enhancing amino acid profiles for livestock and advancing sustainable farming to cultivate the next generation of global customers. They are doing a lot of good work for us overseas. You know, the global demand for soy is just exploding and has exploded over the last 5 years. And we look forward to continue to do so. So you're going to get an education this morning. So please join me in welcoming Brianna and Ryan.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Ryan Olson with the U.S. Soybean Export Council. Thanks for having us again here today. My colleague Brianna is right here in the front row. We're going to kind of tag team this morning. Happy to pinch hit as the keynote speaker. I'm really just the opening act. Brianna is bringing all the star power, so you'll hear from her in a little bit. I told her to keep me on time, so if you see her waving her arms, she's not having a medical emergency. She's just telling me that I'm talking too much. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to talk a little bit about building a preference for U.S. soy in growing global demand. So that's the topic of our conversation today. We're going to do that two ways, talk a little about how we see global demand evolving over the next 10 years, going through 2035. And then Brianna's going to talk a little about some of the work that we're doing overseas to really position U.S. soy using farmer dollars to tap into that demand and be ready in those markets to ship U.S. soy and our products to some of the new customers that we'll see, you know, from the 2030s and beyond. So I want to provide a quick wrap-up of this year as well. We're about 2/3 of the way, I guess about half of the way through our marketing year this year. So we'll do that, talk about demand, and then talk about those case studies. But first, I want to just talk a little bit about who USSEC is. How many of you have heard of USSEC before? So a few hands in the room. So just a little broad overview. USSEC is the global market development organization for the U.S. soy family. So we're supported by soy checkoff dollars, USDA Foreign Agricultural Service cost share dollars, and then QSSBs provide a significant amount of our funding. So we have a good partnership with Illinois Soy and really value their membership. And then we have a kind of a smattering and I think a pretty good cross-section of what a snapshot of the U.S. soy industry is. So we work very closely with the grain trade, so the big traders at ADM, Cargill, Bunge, CHS. The container traders are a big part of our membership portfolio as well. And then we represent kind of the entire value chain going all the way down to some of the life science companies, some of the chemical companies who we work really closely with on market access issues, biotechnology, pesticide issues, et cetera. So we are a value chain organization. We have a unique perspective, and we try to bring that to the markets we're developing, and we're also trying to open up for market access. So our focus is on building a preference for U.S. soy, so differentiating ourselves from Brazil, Argentina, some of our biggest competitors, elevating that preference, and then attaining market access, because if we don't have market access in the countries that we want to ship to, there's no way to ship. So that's really our foundational goal, is opening up those markets and then making sure that when a customer has a choice between Brazil or Argentina and the U.S., they choose the U.S. for a variety of reasons, whether it's quality, amino acid profile, et cetera, sustainability, a number of our real differentiators. So just a real quick update on 23-24 markets for us. Our marketing year ended about 5 months ago for beans and about 4 months ago for meal. So we had a little bit of a slow year last year. Remember, we had low production last year, and that had an effect on our exports, on whole bean export numbers. So it came in about 46 million tons on whole bean exports. We continue to have really, really strong growth in meal exports. So we have been setting meal export records recent years. We set one this last year. We're going to probably set one again this year. That's due to increased crush in the U.S. We're moving that meal out into export markets. We're getting more market share in markets we haven't had access to or haven't had strong market share before in the past, Southeast Asia in particular. So that's happening, and that's been a real strong suit. So whole bean numbers are down kind of on that lower production, but we're really seeing some good growth in the meal side, and that gives us some access to markets that we haven't had a chance to get into before in the past. And this is our look, just a look at this year's numbers so far. Like I said, about halfway to a third of the way through this marketing year. We had a good crop this year, almost a record crop, good yields, and then you're seeing that kind of filter into the export markets as well. About 40 million tons of exports so far this year, and that's up about 19% on where we were last year. So really strong growth, really good export program this year for soy complex, that's beans and meal. Good growth on meal, good growth on beans, so it's looking to be a good year. We're slowing down now. This is the time of year where Brazil starts to harvest. They're maybe about 15% of their way through harvest now, so we get a little bit more competitive on price this time of year. But we've had a good program underway so far, and I think we're going to still stay in the market and be pretty competitive for a couple more weeks here. So I want to talk about our global growth through 2035. So our fundamental goal at USSEC is growing global markets, growing global demand. So we do that in a number of ways, but we want to make sure when we do that, we're thinking smart about how we're doing that. We're investing some farm dollars in the right way, in the right markets, so we can meet the market where it's going to be in 5, 10, 15 years. So as part of that work, we have been doing a study to look at what is the future of U.S. soy. So what is the future of soy? So that's soy demand globally. So when we do our planning, we like to think ahead 2, 3, 5, 10 years. Right now, we're in the midst of our unified export strategy planning for 2026. So almost a year and a half away. In about a month, we're going to start planning for 2027. And then we're constantly thinking about where should we be positioning our dollars, our investments in future markets so that we can be the first ones there, have the freshest relationships, and be the ones where when demand starts to grow, people turn to U.S. soy and say, you're a resource for us. So as part of that kind of forward thinking, we did this project called Future of Soy, which really looks at, given current conditions, where is global soy demand going? What are some of the drivers of that demand? And then how is that going to affect trade in the coming years? So looking out to 2034, 2035. We partnered with Virginia Tech and their Department of Agriculture and Applied Economics to do this study. Jason Grant was a partner for us. He's at Virginia Tech, and then his partner, Catherine Boyes at NC State University, worked with us on this and really modeled out where they see demand, what are the structural drivers of that global demand, and then how does that affect trade flows, import flows for soybeans, meal, and oil. So we're going to go through this a little bit, some of the results of that study, but I wanted to talk about what we see as the drivers of global demand. When we think about what really drives global demand, what are some of the things that we see that increase the consumption of soybeans, consumption of animal proteins. I think a lot of these drivers are structural, but they're not necessarily, shouldn't be necessarily taken for granted. We do market development in order to kind of make sure that we are complementing these drivers and building a preference in the markets that we see global demand rising so that folks can turn to U.S. soy and know that we're there as a preferred choice when that demand does rise. So first, probably one of the largest, most obvious drivers of demand is population growth. We've seen population growth growing. It's going to continue to grow. It's not going to grow at as fast of a rate, but it's going to continue to grow through the end of this century. We're about 8 billion people now. We're going to grow to about 10 billion people by 2100. So, significant 2 billion people additional mouths to feed in the world. And so there's going to need to be some additional food for those people to consume. So that provides kind of a structural growth that's going to happen that's kind of natural in the environment. On top of population, we have per capita income growth really drives a lot of the global demand as people become richer. They want to consume not rice, but they want to consume pork, they want to consume chicken, they want to consume beef. The structure of a population, how young the population is, drives some of the demand too. As you get older, you consume more. So countries with younger populations, with big young populations, those people are going to be consuming more protein as they get older. And so having that large population consume protein across their entire life cycle, that increases demand. And then urbanization. Urbanization has been happening. It's going to continue to happen. As folks get richer, as folks move to urban areas, supply chains get shorter. It gets easier to purchase pork, purchase beef, purchase chicken from the store. Groceries become more modernized. Folks become wealthier. Industrialization happens, and that drives some of the increased consumption for meat that we see around the world. So those are the 4 drivers. This is going to be hard to see, but this is a look at population growth over the years. Top left is the world population growth. I already mentioned that. It's going to grow. But we're going to see population growth amongst the world's regions, kind of at different levels. And that's going to have an effect on where we go and what the distribution of demand is going to be over the next 10 years. So I wanted to highlight China first. China is our biggest market. Almost half of U.S. soybeans go to China. Well, it's been talked about a lot. China's population has probably peaked. Maybe it's even falling now. And so that's going to continue to happen over the coming years. And I'll get back to this in a second. We had some surprising numbers on this, and I'll dig a little bit more deeply into what we see. I think actually a positive story to come out of China, despite the falling population and the falling population growth there. Where we really see the most population growth in the world is going to be in the Middle East and North Africa, that bottom one right there, and then in South Asia. So 2 areas where their populations are growing. South Asia, probably a lower middle income area, so lots of opportunity to grow incomes there as well. Very, very young population, and then a large population. So you get a lot of compounding effects there, as well as a growing population. The Middle East is more diverse. You have some higher income countries, middle income countries, and lower income countries, but a growing population, high birth rates, and then increasing urbanization. Egypt is a great example, probably going to add 50 million people to Egypt in the next few decades, and that's significant. It's all going to happen in that Nile region, hugely urbanized area, and as those people get access to markets, get access to shorter supply chains, they're going to want to consume more chicken, more aquaculture products. I mentioned urbanization. This has been a huge driver, especially in China, for driving pork consumption, chicken consumption, protein consumption. I mentioned earlier we see population declining in China, but what's going to continue to drive demand in China is not going to be growing population. It's going to be the huge rural population that they still have that's going to slowly continue to urbanize over the next few decades. So they have 250 million people still in rural areas. That's going to shrink, and as those people begin to urbanize, that provides an additional market for us to tap into. The blue area is urban population, by the way. The yellow area is rural population. So the bigger the yellow area, the more opportunity we have in the coming years to really tap into new markets as people move to urban areas. So South Asia is there, Sub-Saharan Africa are also there, both also big areas where there is a large rural population and a lot of opportunity to bring those folks along on the growth journey, increase their incomes, urbanize them, and sell them protein products, transition them from maybe they were consuming rice or something else as their primary calorie to consuming animal proteins as their primary calorie. And per capita incomes, we've seen a huge increase in per capita incomes in the last 100 years, really historic. We really need that to continue. As people get wealthier, they consume more protein. That is useful for us as we look for feed markets around the world to tap into. So we need to have per capita income growth continue. I think that's a bit, in my mind, a question mark. We're seeing growth slowing around the world. India was growing fast. It's not growing as fast anymore. There's a big question mark about how fast China will grow. There are some bright spots in Southeast Asia. So we really need to have robust global growth, and not just overall growth, but per capita growth, where individuals are getting wealthier around the world to start to unlock those markets. So those are kind of the drivers. I'm going to go through our 3 soy complex products here, and just talk about some of the results of the study that we did with Virginia Tech and where we see the demand growing in recent years. So in the coming years. So this is out to 2034, 2035, looking at soybean demand here. So China, the largest soybean customer in the world, they set the price for soybeans. They're the largest importer. Their imports are around 111 million metric tons nowadays. In 2024, we see them as part of this study sees that potentially growing to about 150 million metric tons in the next 10 years. So adding about 37 million metric tons of import demand in China over the next 10 years. So remember, that's not from population growth. That's from that rural population continuing to urbanize. That's from incomes growth. Now, this is based on current conditions, based on current market access, current growth trends. So that all could change, and we'll talk about some of the uncertainties later. But that is with the current assumptions, where we could be going for China. China will continue to be a significant importer. They are going to grow their domestic production by a few million tons. They're going to start growing GM. They've already started growing GM this year. That will probably continue. They're going to continue to grow their domestic production, but that's not going to be enough to meet the demand that they're going to have domestically, and they're going to need to continue to import, and that's going to be significant imports. That's going to continue to make them the top destination for soybeans around the world, at least for the next 10 years. EU is interesting. It's going to grow a little bit. EU is an old population, so you wouldn't expect soybean growth. And I'll talk about, when we get to the meal side of the balance sheet, I'll talk a little bit about that story. But we'll see some growth out of the EU. That's good for us. We have freight advantage to the EU. Middle East, I mentioned that some of the structural things going on there. They will grow at about 4.7 million tons of growth in the Middle East for imports of soybeans. We've already seen some of that happening in Algeria, which has opened up 3 new crush plants, and they're importing significant volumes. Egypt is a bright spot and a place where we've done significant work, and Brianna will talk a little bit about, but that's going to drive, those markets are going to drive some of that increased demand in the Middle East. I was actually surprised the Americas is also going to be a significant demand driver for whole soybeans. I think this is probably a Mexico story. This is going to be Colombia, Ecuador. Those countries are going to drive demand. They're middle-income countries. They don't have a lot of population growth, but they're highly, in some cases, highly unequal countries. So there's opportunity to kind of bring the folks that are on the lower end of the income spectrum up to urbanize and to increase their consumption of animal proteins. And then South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, 2 areas where there is a lot of potential. Those will increase. South Asia by about a million tons, and Sub-Saharan Africa from a very, very low level, not a lot of imports of whole beans. There's going to be some capital expenditure, maybe in crush, and maybe add about 1.7 million tons of import demand. So let's look at the meal side. We saw growth in the beans for EU on the last chart. What we're not going to get for growth in, well, we're going to get for growth, we're going to get growth in beans, but the meal is where we're going to lose, where the EU is going to shrink. So as overall demand shrinks in the EU, they have crush plants in the EU. Those crush plants are going to continue to be operational. They'll still crush beans. They just won't import as much meal, and that's where you'll see the decline in demand on the EU as overall protein demand decreases. We'll just lose some of that soybean meal demand into the EU market, so that'll shrink. South Asia will be a big driver of overall demand in soybean meal. We already see that. The Philippines is our #1 soybean meal market. and that will continue. Fast-growing economies in Southeast Asia, young economies, that will continue to grow. Over 10 million metric tons of meal import demand growing there. And then India, lots of talk about India. Remember I said this is considering current market conditions, including market access. India is a big challenging market for us on a variety of issues, including market access. They have a lot of potential. They will grow some of their imports. They do produce a significant amount of soybeans. They'll still continue to grow that production mostly on yield growth. And then the idea and the hope is, and Brianna will talk a little bit about this, about what we're doing in India, is that we can continue to grow protein demand. And as those incomes rise, we'll be there to support that protein growth. And eventually, there'll be pressure internally to go to the international market and say, hey, we need soybean meal demand because we just cannot grow domestic production at the rate that our consumers are demanding protein from their customers. And then South Asia, so this is countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan, where we have seen good growth in recent years. They will also be significant importers of meal in the next 10 years, over 3 million tons. In Sub-Saharan Africa, same story as the soybean side. There'll be some capital expenditure on crush plants in Sub-Saharan Africa, but it won't be enough to tap into all the potential demand, so there'll need to be some meal imports as well. Just because of freight logistics and how the world works, we're probably not going to have huge market share in the future in Sub-Saharan Africa, but if we can continue to grow demand on that continent, that'll help rearrange trade flows, and we can tap into other demand elsewhere where it's more natural for us to tap into. So Brazil, Argentina naturally ship to Sub-Saharan Africa just because they're right across the South Atlantic Ocean. So that makes sense. If we can grow demand in that continent, that'll open up other markets where Brazil maybe has a higher market share that we can tap into and just kind of offset and rearrange trade flows. Just wanted to put this up there. This is soybean oil demand, only to say, I think there are, as we look to the future, we have a little bit of a stronger oil program, export program this year. Obviously seeing a lot of soybean oil demand domestically for energy use. I think that's going to continue. As I understand it, we're going to probably have a little bit more soybean oil exports in the years to come than we have in the last 2 or 3 years. And there's still growth in vegetable oil demand, soybean oil demand around the world, and so that will continue. And so we'll still have a market to play in, a spot market to play in here and there as we have oil available for export markets. So just to wrap up, talk a little bit about expectations and then talk a lot about uncertainties, because these are all assumptions. There are a lot of uncertainties here, and they could all change. So despite global population growth slowing, so the growth rate is slowing, we're going to kind of peak at the end of this century. There's still other drivers out there that can increase global demand. So income growth, urbanization, those will help offset the slowing population growth. We can increase incomes, we can increase urbanization, that helps drive demand. You're going to see new areas that haven't been soy importers become soy importers. South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa are good examples of that. And so that's a positive story both for the populations there and for farmers and exporters in the U.S. Europe's population is going to stagnate. And with that, there's going to be a shift in their import profile. They're one of the biggest importers of meal now in the world. That's going to decline over the years. They're going to be an increasing importer of soybeans, and their composition of imports is going to shift a little bit more to the bean side, less to the meal side. The Americas, which we have a strong market share in, is going to continue to grow. I think that's a positive story for us. If we can get growth close to home in the Americas, we have the ability to capture a lot of that growth just because natural geography works in our benefit. Mexico is a short train ride away. Most of the growth that happens in Mexico, we capture because we have 85% market share in the soybean market in Mexico, and that's super beneficial for U.S. growers and U.S. exporters. And then demographics are really supporting some of the meal markets around the world, especially in the Middle East and especially in Southeast Asia. Lots of uncertainties, though. So we don't know how these will play out. Remember, we're working under kind of what the conditions are now and where they could go if those conditions are the same. So we don't know where the population growth trend is. The UN projects various levels of population growth. We kind of assume the median level of growth could be lower, could be higher. That's a big unknown. Trade tensions, probably don't have to go too much into this. Tariffs are back in the news. You saw the growth in the potential growth that we could see in China. If there's trade tensions there between the US and China, I don't know how that works out, but the uncertainty in the market prevents investment, introduces risk, and the trade doesn't like risk, and that prevents us from tapping into markets around the world. Climate sustainability issues, that can have an effect on production, that could have an effect on the supply side of the balance sheet, and so that could affect price and what people can actually afford to consume. So these are some of the things we're thinking about, we're planning for, we're trying to manage as we think towards the future. And we're trying to position ourselves to be there when these potential trends happen and to make sure we have a presence in these markets so that we can be the number one position to be there so that folks aren't going to Brazil and Argentina naturally. They know that U.S. soy has been on the ground for years and is the first point of contact when they need something. Brianna's going to come up next and talk a bit about what we're doing currently to be there and be on the ground and some of the market development activities we're doing in a few markets around the world. So thanks for your time.
All right, so like Brian said, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing now to position to meet this growing demand that we're going to see later on. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about three main areas. We're going to talk about Egypt, Colombia, and India. And so what you'll notice is two of these markets are directly related to that population growth that Ryan mentioned. And one of those is in the Americas, which we see the population growing, maybe not as quickly, but we see them as an area, like Ryan said, they have a strong preference for U.S. soy, easier to get to nearby markets than far away markets. And so we're going to talk a little bit about this. I also chose these three markets because these are three markets that we have been collaborating with Illinois Soy on for many years. So we've seen direct investment from you all as a state, from your board in these markets, and we talk about these and why we think these markets are important, what the opportunities are there, and talk a little bit about what we've done in those markets. So the first we're going to talk about is Egypt. There's a couple of quick facts on here that I think are just important to establish what the market looks like currently. So a lot of what Ryan mentioned was future, 2030, further out. This is kind of where we're at currently in the market as of last year, early into this year. So they have a population of about 109 million people as of 2023, and they're slated to add about 50 million people by 2050. So that's a fairly large demand or population growth. And like Ryan said, they're all going to be heavily urbanized. So Egypt, the populations live within that Nile River Valley area. So there is not everything is centralized and it is very urban. And so as those populations grow, there's going to be more demand for protein to feed those people. It is the third most populous country in Africa, and they expect it to stay that way. And we, as U.S. Soy, so with the American Soybean Association, prior to the existence of USSEC, we began collaborating in Egypt in 1988. So we have been there for a while. We have been part of the programming and relationship building in that market for a while. And then so I'll hop over to the graph really quickly. What you'll see here is that Egypt has a strong preference for U.S. soy. Now, what you see in this blip in that 22-23 marketing year, so in 21-22, they imported just over 4 million metric tons. They were our top 4 market for that marketing year. But unfortunately, they hit some currency issues, and so it really caused a major issue. They weren't able to import really any product. It didn't just affect U.S. soy. It was overall the country of Egypt really was not able to import a lot of product from anywhere, and they took a large hit. And so what you'll see is that we saw a little bit, the currency issues began to get fixed as of last marketing year, so we see an uptick there. And then as of this year to date, we're at 1.1 million metric tons imported of whole soybeans into Egypt, and we're, like Ryan said, just under halfway through the marketing year. So we see that there will be a steady come back to the market for Egypt as their currency issues continue to be fixed and worked out. They have a very clear preference for U.S. soy, and so they want to make sure that they are getting that product. So what is the soy being used for in that market? There's three main areas, and it's all animal production. Poultry production, dairy production, and aquaculture production. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the programming that we do within each of those areas. So I also added a note in here that USSEC and Illinois Soy have been collaborating in this market since 2019. So you guys, when we began really putting our qualified state soybean board dollars into programming in the states, or from the states into the regions, you'll see that Illinois Soy was one of the first on the scene when it comes to Egypt, and we've seen a lot of growth and a lot of impact with that funding. So some of the key initiatives in Egypt, there's really four main ones: increasing soybean meal inclusion in the animal ration, increased utilization of soybean oil, relationship management, and the soy excellence centers. So as you saw on the previous slide, soybeans coming into the Egyptian market are being crushed in market, and then they're directly being used in animal rations for poultry, dairy, and aquaculture. And so we're working in this market to help them understand the amino acid profile, what value that brings from a higher quality product that is being crushed when you crush U.S. soybeans. Helping them understand that increasing soybean meal in the ration to a higher percentage, what that can do for their poultry production, what that can do for their dairy production. And then as well as aquaculture. So aquaculture is a culturally accepted food across that part of the world, but it's also a cheap source of protein. And so as we see these populations increasing, they have a higher demand for protein. And what better way to get protein than by cheaper protein sources as they're beginning to become more urbanized, and that they're increasing as GDP is increasing. So typically fish feed formulations have approximately 35% soybean meal in the ration, which is a high percentage. They're a small consumer, but large inclusion rate. And so what we see that is helping to explain, as more production of aquaculture spreads around the market of Egypt, is making sure they're maintaining that level of soybean meal, U.S. soybean meal in the ration, so that their animals can have higher, they're healthier. In most cases, a lot of times they're healthier fish. They put weight on quicker. And ultimately, there's a lot of benefits to doing that. From a poultry consumption area, this is by far the largest area we see in Egypt for soy utilization. Poultry consumption within the region has been on an exponential growth, essentially, over the last 10 years. So in 2013, they were approximately producing 1 million metric tons of poultry. In 2023, they were producing almost 2 million metric tons of poultry. So that is a large jump within a 10-year time frame. And this expansion has actually allowed Egypt to become a poultry exporter within the region. So there is not only growth in the country for demand for poultry from consumers in the country, but also in the region. They're exporting to places like Saudi Arabia, Jordan, who don't produce the poultry themselves, but they have a high demand for that protein as well. Soybean oil, we'll talk briefly about that because it's crushed in market. Egypt then uses the oil that they receive from crushing for human utilization, for veg oil, and then within their feed formulations. So we work a lot with helping them to understand the high quality of soybean oil that comes from crushing U.S. soybeans in the market and the benefits and the uses of that. This market is also heavily focused on relationships. As farmers, you all understand the importance of relationships. I grew up on a farm. Some of the relationships my family have been some of the best and most advantageous relationships we've ever had. And so this market is even more focused on relationships at that point. So a lot of what we do within this market is offering one-on-one trainings. It's going in and offering troubleshooting. We take experts into feed mills and things like that, so we can build that relationship while also talking about U.S. soy and the benefits. Then we also have long-term engagement. So as Ryan mentioned, we see a lot of population growth here, so we need to engage early, we need to engage often, and we need to engage for the long term. And so we have created an initiative with the funding of our qualified state soybean boards called the Soy Excellence Centers, or the SECs. And these are workforce capacity building programs where USSEC partners with companies within the regions to provide workforce training about key topics that are important in the local industry. So in Egypt, we offer trainings in aquaculture, dairy production, and feed mill trainings along with poultry production. And so the goal, like I said, is to get in front of these individuals and companies early and often with the benefits of U.S. soy so that they can see the inherent advantages of U.S. soy while they're receiving trainings to further their career, to help create a pipeline of people who have a relationship and know about U.S. soy, so when they do become the purchasing manager of their company, they already have the information, they already have the relationships, and it's just an easy choice for them when they have to choose where to source from. Moving on to Colombia. So Colombia is in our Americas market, and what you'll see here is right now they have just over 53 million people. And by 2050, they're not expected to increase nearly as much as India or Egypt. But what we see is that a lot of this population will become urbanized, and they will have increased GDP, which will allow more purchasing power for the consumer. And so there's a typo on this third bullet. It's the world's third largest importer of U.S. soybean meal. So they're very important to our soybean meal market as we have more meal available on the marketplace. We've been collaborating in this market since 1984, and most of the soy utilized here is also in animal utilization. So as Ryan mentioned, when populations grow, they want to eat more protein, and they don't want it to come from plants most of the time. They want it to come from meat, from chicken, from beef, from pork, that type of thing. And so what you'll see here is we've had some large imports of soybean. They are our third largest market, and you'll see that. So within the market where we stand right now, about 74% of all soybeans, U.S. soybeans imported into the Colombian market, are actually utilized for poultry production. So that is by far the largest consumer of U.S. soybean meal in that market, and swine is at 18%. And so we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in those areas, but we have also been collaborating with with Illinois Soy beginning in 2021 with some aquaculture work in this market. You'll see in the import, or the chart where soybean meal is, you'll see a dip down. A lot of this is financial based. As you all know, inflation is not just a U.S. problem, it is a world problem. And so what we see here is that many of these countries had financial or inflationary problems. So they didn't import as much, but also remember what Ryan said, we didn't have as much product to export the last 2 years. So when supply is down in the U.S., there's just less export. But what you'll see here is that Colombia is a consistently strong market for soybean meal. And as we have more meal available, they have continued to import more. Some key initiatives here in Colombia. This market is focused heavily on sustainability. Because Colombia exports many of their own products that they grow and create or produce, they actually export them to other countries within the region. And so that's finding sustainable raw material is very important to most of these companies. And so that is a huge part of our programming, is helping those companies understand that U.S. farmers raise U.S. soybeans in a sustainable manner. What you do is sustainable, and therefore carrying that on to them as they're sourcing raw materials. So what we do from a sustainability standpoint is we have the U.S. Soy Sustainability Assurance Protocol, or what we call the SSAP. And if you look right on that feed bag, you'll see that Sustainable U.S. Soy logo, and that is directly attached to that SSAP certificate. Ultimately, shipments of soy or soy products are certified. So there is a certificate that goes into the market with a shipment saying that the shipment is certified sustainable. And then consumers can take that certificate, take that sustainability label and apply it to front of packaging. So there's consumer products that have this, as well as products for animal feed, which can then carry on what's called with a fed with sustainable U.S. soy logo. So the goal is to explain the sustainability, show that it is inherent, and help other people market based off of what you all are already doing from a sustainable standpoint. Currently, within Colombia itself, we have 12 companies that use this SUSS logo that's on the bag, and then 2 companies that use a fed with SUSS logo. So it is a growing area for us. A year ago, we had 7 companies. So within 1 year, not even 1 full year, we've increased the companies that are interested in this program. Like I mentioned, poultry is the largest consumer of soybean meal within the market. So what you'll see here is that we do a lot of the same work that we do in Egypt, explaining the benefits of soybean meal, explaining the inherent nutritional value of U.S. soy compared to soy of other origins. We also work on aquaculture. This is a small portion of what is happening in this market, but it is growing quick because the country of Colombia is an exporter of fresh tilapia to many other regions. So we see aqua, we use soy optimized feeds and aquaculture diets, and we see that increase. Like Egypt, there is the Soy Excellence Centers, we partner with local companies within the full Americas region, but specifically for Colombia. We are partnering with local groups to allow the expansion of the SCCs, and in 2023, we had almost 1,000 individuals from the country of Colombia, representing 179 companies participate and graduate from the Soy Excellence Center programming. We have trainings that consist of poultry, aquaculture, dairy production, swine production, and feed milling. We also are seeing an inclusion of soy in the human diet within this market, and when you think soy foods, you think tofu, miso, very traditional soy foods. Within this market, this looks very different. Soy is a total protein, as most of us all know, and can be utilized to add protein as an additive for consumers. And so per capita income in 2024 for the country of Colombia was just under $8,000. So in many cases, consumers are struggling to get the protein they need to survive and be healthy. And so what USSEC has been doing is working within the market to add things like soy flours to bread, which are a daily staple in their diet to help increase protein. Or we work to add soy as an extender into sausage and meat products so that the meats become cheaper for consumers in the market without sacrificing the protein. India, we'll talk quickly about India. As you see here, there is a large population expectation. Don't think that's a surprise to anyone in this room, as well as they're the most populous country in the world. Recently, that tipped over China, and so we can see that growing and continuing to grow, especially based off what Ryan covered earlier. They are the world's largest importer of edible oil, and we have began collaborating in this market in 1996. And so what you'll see in the graph is that this is each market I talked about what they import the most. India right now, due to the market access issues, we really only have access for soybean oil. So what you'll see in 22 and 23 is, 22 and 23 is what we all know, soybean oil was being consumed in the U.S. for biofuels, and part of that big push that we just recently saw where there was crush plants coming online. So we essentially had no soy oil exports. And Ryan talked a little bit about there's going to be a spot market for soybean oil, and most of that's going to go to India. And so that's what we've seen. We've had essentially no exports for the last 2 marketing years. But as of this marketing year to date, we've exported 34,000 metric tons of soybean oil into the Indian market. So when we have soybean oil, India is essentially the first in line to import the oil because of its high quality in nature. Soy usage within the market looks very similar. Poultry production, aquaculture production, and then a little bit of soybean oil. And this is our newest collaboration with Illinois Soy. We began collaborating with you all in this market in 2024. And so what that's looked like is there's 3 main key initiatives within India. We have our Right to Protein campaign, animal and aqua utilization, and soy excellence centers. So as Ryan mentioned, there is going to be high demand growth for soy within many markets. And so within India, we're seeing a growth annually demand for soy is growing annually by like 6% each year, driven by population growth and a need and demand for protein. And so what we see here is that India produces their own soy, and they used to be an exporter of soy on the global level. But now they are essentially meeting their own demand within the country, and we're trying to continue to educate consumers and really everyone on the need for protein in their diet. Many people within the country are unaware of how much protein they need to be healthy, and so what we do is our Right to Protein campaign. This is an initiative that focuses on educating consumers on the need for protein in their diet and what foods they can consume to meet the protein demand. This type of work creates a protein pool, which essentially more protein demanded by the consumer means more eggs and poultry produced, which means there's more animals that need to be raised, which means they need to eat more feed. So we're taking the protein and we're pulling it through the value chain. Like I said, for many years, India was an exporter of soybeans on the global market, but over the last decade, they began consuming their own supply. As there's been a growing demand for protein within the market, what we will see is as that growing demand continues, India will at some point have to begin importing. Now, there are some market access things that have to be shaken out at that point, but at some point, India is not going to be able to meet their own demand. And so they will have to begin importing, and we're stationed there. We've created the relationships. Now we work on the market access portion of things. In fact, we saw a glimpse of this in 2022. India had a small shortage. They were unable to meet the demand of the poultry industry within their market, and they opened up a small window to allow soybean meal imports into the country. And so we saw right at 800,000 metric tons of U.S. soybean meal imported into the market when that window was open. So when the market is open, U.S. soy will be ready to be imported. From an animal and aqua perspective, in the meantime, we're talking about higher inclusion rates of soy. We're explaining a lot of those same benefits that we're doing in Egypt and Colombia to try to explain how they can meet the demands of the animals they're producing to meet the demands of the human protein demand. We also are talking a lot about aquaculture. So culturally, there's some sensitivities to different types of proteins within this market. So we see large poultry consumption and large aquaculture consumption. And so what we're seeing there is explaining the benefits of U.S. soy optimized feeds and technologies to help feed their aquaculture to meet the demand of the consumer. The last initiative here is the Soy Excellence Centers, and same process as the other two, but this one was specifically we were able to jumpstart this one specifically with the help of Illinois Soy. So your funding and your support of this project helped us create a Soy Excellence Center that is targeted specifically towards the Indian market. We've got the same principles as the other SECs with an additional focus on soy food applications. So there is a lot of vegetarianism within the country, and so soy foods, traditional soy foods, are used to meet that demand as well. There's a big focus on the SECs for trainings for poultry and aquaculture as well, along with soy foods, and we're working to maintain and build those long-term relationships within the market to help create that preference for U.S. soy. And in these photos here, I just want to point out we have social media campaigns for the Right to Protein. This one was understanding the need for protein as a mother who is currently pregnant, and so a lot of that is just helping all consumers understand what protein is and why they need it. So with that, we will be happy to take any questions for Ryan or I. Yes?
You didn't talk about, you talked a lot about bean meal.
Yep.
But did not talk about competition from synthetic amino acids, what issues are created there. Competition from synthetic amino acids. And what might be issues there, nor did you talk any at all about infrastructure issues within the United States to move bean meal from the interior to ports, and for the ports to even handle that. Can you discuss both of those issues for me, please?
Yeah, so from a synthetic amino acid standpoint, the U.S. soybean meal, and we have, so let me back up and say, I'm not an expert in this. We have subject matter experts whose entire job is to understand the amino acid profile and the benefit of that. But essentially, U.S. soybean meal has higher amino acid profile than soybean meal from other origins. And so there is less need for synthetic amino acids when you utilize soybean meal within, U.S. soybean meal within the ration. And so that is a lot of what the education is on to try to combat that utilization of synthetic amino acids. U.S. soy, we don't ever really talk negatively about any of our competitors. We just show the benefits of who we are and the product that you all raise that and produce that is naturally a higher quality. So what we do to combat that is just simply, we have tests, we have fact sheets, we have mountains of data that we use to do when we go in and do those one-on-one trainings I was talking about. We essentially sit down and look at what a company is currently using, and we say, okay, we see that, here's the benefit you can reap from a dollar perspective, from an amino acids perspective, depending on what the need of the company is. So I'd be happy to connect you and get you some more specific information on what that actual benefit looks like from a synthetic versus U.S. soy. But most of the amino acids in the U.S. soy or in the U.S. soybean meal, the need for amino acids in animal rations, a lot of that can be met naturally without synthetics by utilizing U.S. soybean meal. And so that's where we're at from a marketing standpoint. From transportation, so I'll mention that there is a large meal facility being built within Grays Harbor from AGP out in Washington. And so that is supposed to come online in 2026, and that's focused solely on that meal. And from a transportation perspective, so the interesting thing about USSEC is we don't do anything domestically. We work with our partners like Soy Transportation Coalition and the American Soybean Association to provide information about export and growing demand so that they can then go lobby or they can then go work on grants and infrastructure information to help build up the infrastructure within the U.S. And so we certainly have heard that from a lot of states and from a lot of people that the infrastructure within the U.S. is not there to meet this demand. But we are seeing investment from exporters to build facilities to potentially handle this thing, to handle the meal coming online like what we've seen from AGP.
And could you talk a little bit more about the Soybean Excellence Centers? Who's paying for those? Is any of the USAID involved with that? And do we have those in the United States?
So the Soy Excellence Centers are funded completely by our qualified soybean boards. So his question for those who didn't hear was, the Soy Excellence Centers, how are they funded? Is anything from USAID, is that funding those? And essentially, where are we getting funding? And is there is there anything like that within the U.S.? And so the Soy Excellence Centers are completely funded by other state organizations. So we have 15 qualified state soybean boards that currently help fund the Soy Excellence Centers. So Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, Wisconsin, Tennessee, really any state that soybeans are grown in with earnest has actively thought the SECs were a good idea and are funding that. And so it's being completely funded by our state partners. The SECs began with the ag trade promotion funds from the trade war back in 2019. That was what kicked off the Soy Excellence Centers. But the ATP funds have expired as of now. We only had a 4 or 5 year window to spend that, to utilize those dollars. And then we have what we call the Regional Ag Promotion Program, which is what is called RAP funding. That is funding the Soy Excellence Centers, a small portion. That is run specifically through USDA, so we do not have any USAID dollars. We do not utilize those dollars. Those dollars are utilized mostly by our sister organization, WISH. But our SECs are being completely funded by our state partners, which is why this type of relationship and the benefit that you all see in those is very important for us.
Brianna,
Yes.
Brianna, one thing, just to go back and touch on the question about the amino acid profiles.
Yep.
Sure. Todd Main, I'm the Director of Market Development for Illinois Soy. The amino acid question is a great one, and I wanted to just expand on that.
two things. One is that USSEC has actually just published a study last fall, which for the first time documents the advantages that U.S. soy brings to animal production. And they looked at primarily aquaculture, so they did shrimp, tilapia, and rainbow trout. And they found that even though U.S. soy is a little more expensive than some of our competitors, that the advantages show up on the back end in terms of the animals put on more weight, and the time to come to market is shorter. And so the economic hit that we take from our low-cost competition is somewhat resolved that way. And that's really, really important, because when we deal with trade teams that come in and trips that we do overseas with buyers, you know, we say U.S. soy is great, U.S. soy is great, but the conversation gets a little thin after that. But now we've actually got published data that shows that the advantages are there. So that's very exciting. Second thing is we're having some conversations with some of the larger feed mill companies in the U.S. about inclusion rates, which is the amount of soy that's used in the different animal feeds that they're making. But more importantly, we're talking about developing species-specific feed. And so some of you who are in the livestock business may know about Cargill. They make a specific branded feed for beef and dairy, and they've got now one for shrimp. But there's also some other work that's being done so that we can, so the future of this is the long and short of this is that we are going to design, by working with the feed millers, species-specific profiles with the maximum amount of soy that we can do, and to get the, you know, the right benefit for that. And so that's an initiative that we haven't talked a lot about today because it's on the horizon, but we're at Illinois Soy, we are seriously working on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Todd. To answer the second part of your question about domestic utilization of the Soy Excellence Centers, USSEC as a whole, we are not allowed to work domestically. That would be the United Soybean Board. So I know a lot of groups like the LEAD groups and things like that, like Illinois, the state of Illinois has through the universities. A lot of them do a lot of the similar trainings that we're doing, but the Soy Excellence Centers do not exist domestically currently. Any other questions?
You just mentioned that specific animals. Is there specific for humans?
So specifically to the information that Todd was talking about, we do not have that type of specific information for human utilization just yet. Other than the fact that we work with the Soy Nutrition Institute, which is also another domestic group that focuses on explaining the benefits of soy nutrition in the diet. And so we work with them. They do a lot of the research, and then we continue to create programming based off that. So explaining that, taking their information about explaining the health benefits of U.S. soy and utilizing that to explain the benefits of consuming soy within a market. So not directly in the way that Todd was talking about, where it's, you know, we leave most of that research up to the Soy Nutrition Institute. USSEC, we enjoy working with partner organizations who are specialty or subject matter experts. And so we work with groups like Soy Transportation Coalition and the Soy Nutrition Institute to try to utilize their subject matter expertise across the board to help create programming around the world. All right, thank you all.